So ministers might now have to pay for their water and electricity bills just like everyone else. It comes after President Cyril Ramaphosa ordered the withdrawal of amendments to the ministerial handbook pending a review. So this means taxpayers may not have to pay for the water and electricity at official residences. After all, that's for ministers and their deputies. Ramaphosa says he listened to the public outcry after some organizations said the amendments amount to corruption. Let's bring in Cosatu's parliamentary coordinator, Matthew Parks. He joins us on the phone lines this morning. Matthew, good morning. Great to have you with us on the program. I don't know. Actually, there you are on our video lines. I don't know about this back and forth with the president. Implementing certain things and then supposedly listening to the outcry from the public and then backtracking. What do you make of it?
Look, it's positive the president responded. It's positive that he's recalled this handbook and said it's going to be reviewed further. So you do want a president who listens to public agreements with satisfaction. So we're pleased with Cosatu that he has done that. But this also was done, about 3 years ago when he took office after the last elections, where the government had promised a review of the handbook. They promised a removal of the grotesque and excessive perks given to ministers. And so we were quite shocked when it came out to light that actually, in fact, some of these perks had actually been increased. So we hope this time government will do it correctly. We hope this time the cabinet will hear what the public is saying and have a bit more sense of self-introspection and humility and modesty. Because really it is unacceptable for ministers who are paid about 2.4 million rand a year, 200,000 rand a month, who live really a life of luxury in most instances, to be then asking for the public to be paying for the electricity and water bills of the ministerial houses. We have no problem with the government providing ministerial accommodation for ministers in Pretoria and Cape Town because that's part of their work duty. Equally, for government to provide cars and petrol when they perform the ministerial functions, there's no problem because those are tools of trade, so to speak, and we accept that ministers have very short lifespans often. But there needs to be a sense of modesty as well. When workers are struggling to pay for electricity, when we've had double-digit increases in electricity tariffs since 2006, because government over many years has failed to invest in Eskom and generation capacity, in dealing with corruption there and so forth. When we have municipal electricity, water hikes and so on, because again, government has failed to address the financial crisis crippling our municipalities, then for the very same ministers to plead poverty for themselves. It's unbelievable that a minister can say he's struggling to afford medical aid. Well, why doesn't the minister make sure the government fixes public healthcare infrastructure? So when workers are struggling, when public servants weren't given an increase in 2020, when many municipal workers had not received their salaries, when many workers at SOEs like SAA, SA Express have been retrenched, it's unbelievable for ministers to plead poverty for themselves and basically to give a middle finger to the rest of society. Right.
I hear you. And yes, obviously we do want a president who responds when there is a public outcry. But I think the question then becomes, why make these amendments to the ministerial handbook in the first place?
It's difficult to explain because this is really political madness. No sober person could have said this makes sense. I think it does show at times that politicians often just simply lose touch with reality with the common populace. Because I don't think a sober politician could have said this thing makes sense. Nonetheless, it is a problem. And I think we all need to put much greater scrutiny. We hope that when Cabinet comes with a new ministerial handbook, that they actually will release it for public comment like they do with all legislation, regulations, policies and so forth, because this is not their private purse for them to raid and to live a pampered lifestyle as they choose. And the other excessive perks which are still there, the right of ministers to bring their wives along with the husbands as relevant on international trips doesn't make sense. There's no justification for it. The thing of former members of parliament, former ministers and the spouses having free plane tickets after they left office as well doesn't make sense. Because when you leave Newzroom Afrika and I leave Cosatu, we're not going to get benefits besides our pension funds from our former employers. So I'm not sure why ministers feel themselves to be some sort of gilded class. And it doesn't just stop there. We need to look at the lifestyle of premiers, of MECs, of mayors, because really there's a real sense of entitlement amongst many of our establishment, something that Madiba had warned and promised against in 1994, and I think we really need to put it under a huge microscope to cleanse it of this kind of nonsense.
Yeah, absolutely. So we go from free water and electricity on the taxpayers tab. We go from including vehicles to the value of 800,000 rand access to as many as 15 aids. I mean, you talk about entitlement, Matthew, and being out of touch. There's been that sense really around ministers and people in government being out of touch, for example, with the load shedding crisis and really the kind of pressure that South Africans are under and South African businesses are under in trying to cope with the load shedding crisis. Gwede Mantashe himself saying that we need to get on with it. You know, load shedding is going to be with us. And yet they are exempt, government ministers, from load shedding at their official residences. I mean, what does this mean for, how do we view it as an electorate? The fact that, as you say, our ministers are in this sort of gilded cage, or well, not cage, they're living this sort of gilded lifestyle.
Look, I think we need to view it with this extreme sense of disdain and contempt. We should not be allowing this at all, and we need to constantly put pressure on it. So, for example, the ministerial cars. Yes, ministers do need cars to take them to their work functions, etc. Of course, no problem with that. But let not be the ministers who choose the type of car they get. Let the government garage, which manages the government fleet, select the cars for ministers, for premiers, for mayors, etc., and then allocate them for their term of office, and then recall them afterwards. Let it be a single uniform standard. Instead of us having to hear silly stories about ministers choosing this kind of car and it's above the salary, etc., and just becomes a constant source of embarrassment. And ministers really need to understand that we're in a crisis now because largely of government's failures, from electricity to water to roads and so forth. It's wrong for Minister Mantashe to say people should get on with it because these things have huge implications. Workers are spending a lot of their money. They don't have huge salaries in the first place, having to make alternative plans when they cannot cook for their families because there's no electricity at home. Do they go and spend a lot of money at KFC, for example, which they can't afford? There's huge disruption to workplace when workers are stuck on trains and metro rail for 2 hours at a time because of load shedding or cable theft. It means they get less salaries when they get to work because they get paid according to the hour. It means those companies are struggling to survive. We've seen about 11,000 restaurants closing over the last 3 years because of the economic crisis, because of COVID, electricity, and so forth. Those workers are now sent home without salaries. Even when they do work, restaurants work according to how many hours, how many meals did you sell. And they cannot sell if there's no electricity. So it's a bit callous for ministers to say people should get on with it. Government should get on with fixing electricity, fixing Eskom. They should be getting on with relieving Eskom of the debt burden, allowing Eskom to focus its revenue on generation and maintenance. And equally, government should be doing what it promised to do of cracking down on municipal debts to Eskom, because how do you expect Eskom to fix itself if municipalities owe it about 40 billion rand and rising?
Yeah, absolutely. Matthew, let me thank you for your time this morning. Matthew Parks, Cosatu's parliamentary coordinator. Thanks again for painting the picture of the kind of pressure South Africans are under in our country.